Hi, Dallas. Ira here. I am recording this audio feedback on your statement of belief in hopes that it'll be helpful to you as you're doing your final revisions on your defining good argument in digital context paper. So essentially what I'm going to do is walk through your paper and just respond to some of the thoughts that are motivating and driving the paper, and ask you to think about those particular things in your larger essay that you're completing right now. So one of the things that you basically kind of organize your paper around is the idea that a good argument contains validity, is able to be proven with facts, and contains a good arguer. So it seems like there's three pieces there: validity, provability, and something to do with the person who's making the argument. So I'd be interested to know more about how you see petty argument as failing in these regards. What constitutes petty argument? So you talk about people being ridiculous or arguing about ignorant things, and you offer the example of people arguing about whether Avril Lavigne is dead or not, etc. All of these things. And I'm curious, do you think those are bad topics, or do you think that it's mostly about the arguments that people offer? So you say almost all the time these people have the absolute worst arguments that aren't even valid, and then you say they don't show any proof or reasoning as to why they think their argument's important or correct. And so as a reader, what I find myself wondering there is, what for you is the relationship between proof or reasoning and validity in argument? What is a valid argument? What does it mean for an argument to be valid? And how is a valid argument related to the kinds of proof that people offer? And how's it related to the way that they lay out their argument? So when you say proper argumentation is also necessary because without it things end with violence, I'd be interested to hear more about like your reasoning there, especially now when we bring it into digital contexts where there's no possibility of direct interpersonal physical violence. Do we count emotional violence? Do we count belittling people as violent? Maybe not. Why not? And how does that relate to good or bad argumentation? So now kind of coming through. So this idea about validity is a little confusing to me. I'm not sure what you mean by valid. So you say in order to have a good argument, first it must be valid. Do you mean the thing that you are trying to argue must be true and correct in some ultimate way? Because isn't it the case that often we don't know for sure? And if that's not what you mean, what exactly do you mean? So your example here is arguing about whether the sky is blue or not. That's fine. We all know the sky is blue. But of course, when we all know the sky is blue, that does sort of depend on how we define the sky and how we define blue. But so I want to kind of challenge you or press you a little bit to think about what validity means to you, and what we do with those many, many cases where we don't all know something that are probably worth arguing about, worth trying to discover a shared view. Now, you say the next thing, the argument needs to be proven with cold, hard facts. Now, and obviously, I certainly am not going to disagree that trying to make up facts and pretend you know what you're talking about when you don't makes you a liar. I totally agree. And that feeding people with wrong information can be harmful. I also agree. But I wonder, again, what about all those many cases where cold, hard facts are not available? Or where there's a lot of cases where they are, right? But there's also a lot of cases where they're not, where it's harder to know what's true, and where the whole reason we're arguing about what's good or bad is precisely because we have really different views that can't be proven in any final or certain way. Still, we want to be able to talk about those things. If we can't, we have no chance of living together, right? So, I think the idea of saying let's Google it and turning to sources of authority to try and find what is the case as well as we can. I think it's a great way to think about. One of the things that good argument needs to do, it needs facts in order for it to make sense and be proven. But again, I do want to kind of urge you to think about all of the many arguments, including some that we've looked at in class, where there just aren't clear, simple, hard truths, and yet we still wish to argue, and good argument might still happen. Now, this last one, I think is really interesting. You say a good argument needs a good arguer, and here we're moving from things that are part of the argument, how the argument unfolds, to this idea that there's a kind of person who forms the basis for the argument. I think that's really interesting, and I'd love to hear you kind of push that a little bit further. You say a good arguer does not listen. I'm thinking you probably mean does listen. I'm not really sure. A good arguer does not listen and is not able to pull their emotions out of it and just have a discussion. Maybe that's a bad arguer. Yeah, I'm a little confused there. I like the idea that a good arguer can listen intently and can be fully involved and understand what the other person is saying. I think that in terms of thinking about what or who a good arguer is, I think that's a really nice way of thinking about that. I also, though, kind of wonder, how does that work online? How do we know when people are listening intently when we're not face-to-face with them? Do we know? I think that's an interesting question that's probably important for your definition to kind of address. I think, let's see, to go down, one of the things that you really focus on when talking about listening is that what's at stake is being respectful. And you feel that society needs to have more respect for one another because it will help everyone to have better arguments. And I broadly agree. I mean, I think probably it's a nice way of thinking about who a good arguer is. There's somebody who listens and somebody who practices respect. And I'd be interested to hear more about what does it look like to practice respect? How do we know when a person's arguing respectfully? Because surely we can disagree strongly with each other, right? We have to be able to on some things. And yet we still need in some way to be respectful. So what does that mean? I wonder if that's something you can trace out a little bit more in that larger essay. Now, as you say, not everyone has to agree on everything. In fact, we shouldn't. We're humans that are all different with different values. And I totally think that's correct. I have no dispute with that whatsoever. But I also know that to say that is to acknowledge that some arguments are probably not going to be valid in some final sense. So that you're saying that kind of emphasizes how important it is for you to work through a little more fully what you think of as validity and why. So I'm looking forward to seeing the final product of your Defining Good Argument in Digital Context essay. And I hope these thoughts on the statement of belief are helpful as you're producing that. Thanks.